Today, the name Iran constantly appears in world news, conflicts, politics, international tensions. But what many don't want to know is that this country has a biblical history that goes back thousands of years. In fact, the territory we know today as Iran appears several times in the Bible. However, in the scriptures, it isn't called Iran. The Bible knows it by another name, Persia, and its role in biblical history is far more important than most people imagine. To understand it, we have to travel back in time to one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. Over 2,500 years ago, Persia rose as an unstoppable power. Its territory spanned much of the known world, from India to the Mediterranean. One of the most famous rulers of this empire was Cyrus the Great, under his leadership. Persia conquered the mighty Babylonian Empire in the year 539 BC. But what happened after this conquest was something extraordinary. While other empires oppressed the peoples they conquered, Cyrus made a decision that would change the history of God's people. For many years, the people of Israel had lived in exile in Babylon. The temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed. The nation was scattered, but then something surprising happened. King Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild God's temple. This event is recorded in the book of Ezra. What is most impressive is that this very act had been announced many years earlier by the prophet Isaiah. In the book of Isaiah, God mentions Cyrus by name even before he was born. This has led many scholars to consider this passage one of the most astonishing prophecies in the Bible. In other words, a Persian king was used by God to restore the people of Israel. But Persia doesn't just appear in history. It also appears in the prophetic visions of the prophet Daniel. In the book of Daniel, the prophet receives a symbolic vision of animals representing world empires. One of them is a ram with two horns. The text itself explains that this ram represents the kingdoms of Media and Persia. This vision describes how this empire would conquer other nations and dominate much of the world. Historically, that is exactly what happened. The Medo-Persian Empire became the new world power after Babylon. Many see this as further evidence that the visions in the book of Daniel accurately describe historical events. Another important moment where Persia appears in the Bible is in the story of Queen Esther. This story takes place within the Persian Empire. The king mentioned in this book is Xerxes I, also known as At. In this story, an evil plot threatens to destroy the Jewish people. But a young Jewish woman named Esther becomes queen of the empire. Thanks to her courage and faith, the Jewish people are saved from destruction. This account shows again how God was at work even within the great empires of the world. However, Persia doesn't only appear in the biblical past, it also appears in prophecies about the future. In the book of Ezekiel chapter 38, Persia is mentioned as one of the nations that will be part of a coalition of peoples. These nations are associated with a great confrontation related to Israel. Many biblical interpreters have noted that the name Persia corresponds to the territory we know today as Iran. For this reason, some scholars believe the modern country could play a role in future prophetic events. Although there are different interpretations, this passage continues to generate great interest among biblical researchers. For centuries, the country's official name was Persia. But in 1935, the government decided to officially adopt the name Iran. However, the history, culture, and territory remain the same as the ancient Persia mentioned in the Bible. This means the modern country has historical roots that trace directly back to biblical times. So, who is Iran in the Bible? Iran is ancient Persia, a powerful empire that dominated much of the ancient world. Was used by God to free the people of Israel, fulfilled prophecies announced centuries before, and even appears in prophetic passages about the future. The story of Persia reminds us of something important. Throughout the centuries, empires have risen and fallen, but the biblical narrative shows that behind human history, there is a much larger plan. And within that plan, Iran has a place that has been recorded forever in the pages of the Bible. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more mysteries from the Bible, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because many of humanity's most surprising stories were already written in the Bible.